Hello and welcome to the Three Peaks podcast, where we take a break from the hike of life and appreciate the view. Today we have a special guest. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thank you. My name's Jason Hewlett, and I like that intro in the Three Peaks. I did not know that we had a matching peak situation here. Did you notice my logo?
Yeah.
That's got three peaks as well. I love that you guys have done this. And so I call what I do, I'm a professional entertainer and speaker, and I get to do that for private corporate events, and I speak on this thing called The Promise. And so maybe we can talk about that today.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to. All right. Go.
So you're a public speaker, and one thing I feel like people fear a lot when they're doing public speaking is not connecting or getting the attention of their audience. So my first question to you is, what are some of the best ways someone can get the attention of their audience?
Well, that's a great question, Ezra. I appreciate it, and I'll tell you, the fastest way to connect with an audience, in my opinion, has been to make people laugh. And so I like to do whatever I can to make them laugh, whether it's a silly face or a funny voice, something they're familiar with. And another good way is actually to tell a vulnerable story. And that means to share something authentic you've been through. So if I were to speak to kids, I might say something like, hey, I remember being a kid when I was 5. I found out I was different from everybody else because my mouth was so huge. Someone told me that on the bus. And I got on the bus and the guy was like, your mouth is huge. And I was like, and then now that's an authentic but also vulnerable and comical story. Mm-hmm. So that connects with the audience really quickly. And that's really been a secret of mine to make it so that I connect quick.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the greatest way to connect with an audience, because just bringing something or a person down to earth and like finding a way to connect with the people you're trying to speak to is the best way to communicate to them.
Awesome. Yeah, it really seems to help, and it's tricky to do that sometimes because we're like, well, I don't know how much I should share. I don't want to look stupid. I don't want to feel like a fool, but a lot of our willingness to go there makes it so that people connect with us more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So.
And then my other question is, how does making a connection with the audience make a difference in your message or topic?
Well, if they're connecting with what you're talking about, they're going to listen more. They're going to be more interested and excited. And obviously, sometimes people stand up and speak about something we have no idea why we would want to listen. But if they make us want to listen, then maybe we would. For example, I'm speaking about promises, and you can kind of see it around my boom arm here. But most people don't want to talk about a promise. And so I just say, hey, because most people break promises, so they probably don't want to talk about it. So instead I just say, hey, a lot of people talk about goals and goal setting, and maybe you set a New Year's resolution that you're having a hard time keeping. But I like to say, why set a goal when we can make a promise? Yeah. So how about making some good promises and making some really great goals as well? And so I talk them through that and get them interested in the message. And then eventually when they realize, oh, that relates to me, that can help my life, it actually connects quite quickly.
Yeah. And so it said on your link then that you were an author and you published your own book called Promise to the One. And I was just wondering, what was your biggest inspiration for that book?
Oh my goodness. Good question, Ezra. This is the book, and it was published by a publisher called Sound Wisdom. And as you see, there's the mountain again. So you guys should like that with your three peaks thing. But let's see, what was the inspiration for that? Well, sometimes when you get to a point when you feel like you haven't done all that you were meant to do, you start to question, if you were to pass away early, if you've created everything you could have and should have. And one of the things that I had not yet done before I have a life-threatening illness, let's say, or before the plane goes down, and not to sound gruesome, but it's important to think about those things sometimes, and that might drive us to creating something we never would have before. So actually, this book, I thought about writing it for almost a decade.
Yeah.
And I pretended like I was writing it for about a year. I mean, I sat down
Mhm.
and rewrote the intro over and over and over and over. And then one day I just made a promise to my family and I said, I'm going to go up to the mountains. I'm not coming back until this book is written. And so I did that. I made that promise. It's a 255-page book, and I
Mhm.
wrote it in 3 days. So,
Nice.
yeah, isn't that interesting? Sometimes we just have to force ourselves up the mountain,
Yeah.
and then we'll come back down with something better.
Yeah. And what was some of the challenges that you faced when you were writing it?
The greatest challenge is self-editing. It's
Mhm.
better to just write and write and write, and then go back and edit later. So if you're trying to create something and you're going, man, I don't know, I'm not sure about myself, just write it, just create it, just do your art. It's just like you guys do in this podcast. I think it's
Yeah.
amazing. You could easily go back later and chop up however much you want to if you
Yeah.
didn't like how it turned out. But it's important that you press the button and you create something.
Yeah. And you're obviously leaving your mark. So if someone were to look back on your career or anything like that, or your life, they could find this book and they could see just the mark you left on the world before you passed or kicked the bucket.
That's right. Yeah, Ivan, I appreciate that. And, I hope that that's what people will remember me for, a book worth reading. And I wrote a book worth writing as well. And so, yes, when I do pass, whenever that is, hopefully that's something that they'll look at and go, I'm glad he wrote that.
Yeah, okay. So we heard about your journey about it, but what inspired you to be an author? Like, what was your inspiration? Like, was it your family or like just was it yourself?
Yeah, thank you. It's Amari, is that right?
Hermione.
Armani? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Armani, thank you. Armani, I think I was inspired to write it because I had talked about it for a long time, talked about the message of promise, but I had never articulated it in a book. And once you articulate what you're trying to say through words and chapters and pages, making it worth turning the page the next time, that will be inspiring for your audience and for yourself. I really did want my family to be proud of it, and I really wanted to leave something for the world. And so, yeah, my inspiration was some of the greatest authors I've ever read. I would read their stuff and say, could I write a good book? And this book launched in the #1 in the spiritual self-help section of Amazon, which I found interesting. And so I thought, okay, yeah, it inspired me that other authors had released books as well. So I thought maybe I can too.
So I heard you were talking about book authors and like how they inspired you. But if you were to go through all the books you've ever read, what book would be your favorite that you read?
Oh my gosh, there are some great ones that it's hard to pin down to one. I would say there's a book called As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. Very, very old book, but it's a short one, and I used to read it. How old are you guys?
I'm 13, the youngest, and the oldest is
I'm 17 and
I'm 15.
so yeah.
15. Okay. So let me tell you a story. But when I was just a little younger than Armani, what happened is I was not doing well in school. And my dad came into my room and sat down on the bed and he said, "Son, you're failing school." And I was like, "Yeah, I know." I think I was probably 11 years old. And he set a stack of books on my bed, not like Dr. Seuss and stuff, but like all these self-help books. And he said, if you'll read these books, you'll be successful. And there were books like As a Man Thinketh by James Allen, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale, and some other classics like The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And he said, if you'll read these books, even though I could barely read at the time because I was failing school, he said, you'll be successful in whatever you do. And so I was most inspired by As a Man Thinketh, but I loved all of those books that he gave me. And eventually I caught up in school. I did have to be held back. I will tell you that. 9th grade, I was finally held back. Can you imagine being held back in 9th grade? So I did 9th grade twice. It's my first encore, but it was fine. turned out good.
That's great. And you're a public speaker. So how did you find yourself wanting to be like a public speaker? Because I know a lot of people like struggle with talking in front of a lot of people. So I was just wondering, like, what was the kick for you to that?
When I was a kid, I saw other people come to my school and do assemblies. And I remember watching them speak, and I was like, man, that's cool. They're making me laugh. They're making me cry. Maybe sometimes they would sing or something. And I was like, that's what I want to do for a living. And so that was really the inspiration behind it, as I just wanted to be good at it. And then I remember seeing my dad. He was a very successful salesman, and he would get on stage and he would win every award at every ceremony we ever went to. And he would give speeches that people would just cry and laugh and stand up and cheer. And I was like, wow, I want to do something like that someday. So that's been a lot of the inspiration for me.
Yeah. And I saw back on a couple of videos that you can move your eyebrows pretty, like, how do you do that?
How do I do the eyebrows? Well, so I'm going to show you guys what I learned is that when I was little, I had a face that could do a lot of things. Now, as you're watching, and as the people that are watching this in the near future, I want you to think about your eyebrows and how you could isolate one and just hold it up there, and then bring them back together, and one, and bring them back together, and one. So I'm just holding it up there. And then I found out that I could move them and just kind of control them, but I had to actually hold it down until I could get it to move on its own. And so I found out that through practice, that it's not just practice makes perfect, but perfect practice makes perfect. And so I did all that I could to figure out how to move those muscles. Now, that wasn't the first thing I figured out I could do, Armani. What happened is I found out I could control this lip right here, my upper lip.
Wow.
And then the dentist saw this and he's like, that's your gift. And I said, this is my gift. I was 5 years old. And he said, yeah, you can control that. Can you do the other side? And I naturally could move it back and forth, back and forth. And the dentist said, you have a gift to control your face. You should work on that. And so then I found out I could catch a wave like the ocean. Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Hello. And after a little while, I thought, wouldn't that be cool if I could do the ocean with the waves of my lip and my eyebrows at the same time? These are things that I practiced instead of reading and doing math and schoolwork. So anyway, I found out I could do a lot of funny things with my face, and that's actually been a way that I've made a living, is that people pay me to make them laugh by doing things that are family friendly and that work for every kind of audience.
Oh, that's great.
Absolutely. So one question we really wanted to ask you is the promise. What is the promise, and how does it inspire people to make more promises?
Awesome question. Really, when you think about a promise, it's something that you say you're going to do and then you do it.
Yeah.
And so if you say to somebody, hey, let's be on the call today on Tuesday, and I don't even show up, then I've broken a promise to you guys, right? I mean, I was having a struggle getting my camera to work for some reason, and I was late, which I hate being late. So even to myself, I broke a promise by being 2 minutes late to the call. But here's what the promise really comes down to. I believe that every single person is born to be a superstar.
Yeah.
All of us were born to be a legendary leader, somebody who makes a difference. And I believe that every single one of us can discover within ourselves how we can share those gifts and talents that we have. And that is essentially the promise. You see, sometimes you don't know that somebody has a great skill or gift.
Yeah.
But they never share it. They hide it. You might even know friends of yours that used to be really good artists, but no longer draw.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're a really good author, but they no longer write.
Yeah.
And so the promise is to actually magnify your talents and your gifts. And I call it identify, clarify, magnify. To identify your gifts, clarify with others, and magnify your promise is part of living your best life. So that's what the promise is about.
Yeah. And honestly, it's really difficult for one person to find their gift. they could spend their entire life living and not necessarily know what their gift is. So for you, what are some of the stories of you trying to learn your gifts, and how have you taken them and like craft them to the perfection that they are right now?
Oh, that's a great question, Ivan. Thank you. I would say that when we have somebody that sees something in us that we don't see in ourselves, we need to listen to them. Have you ever had a teacher or a parent or a friend say to you, "Hey, you're good at that. You should do that again." And you're like, "No, I'm not." You know?
Yeah.
Or you just brush it off and you're like, "You're a liar."
Yeah.
Well, sometimes they might be right. And especially if it's an adult who wants you to succeed. And so one of my favorite stories is when I was in high school, and remember, I repeated ninth grade twice, so I was a little older. I was working on becoming a professional basketball player. I wanted to play in the NBA. And obviously you can see that didn't happen.
Yeah.
But guess what happened? As I was walking down the hall at school, I was happy inside because I had some success in basketball, and I started singing out in the halls. I just started singing like, and it made no sense why I was singing in the hall, but I was just having a good time. All of a sudden, the door to the choir room flew open, and this lady went, "Ah!" And her name was Mrs. Hall. She was the choir teacher, and I had never been in the choir. But she said, "Who's singing in the hall?" And she was from Wales, so she had an accent. "Who's singing in the hall?" I said, "It was me. I'm sorry. I'll stop." She said, "Don't stop. You're a singer." And I said, "No, I'm a basketball player." And she said, "No, you're a singer. Come into my classroom. This is your audition." Now, you guys, I didn't want to audition for the choir. I was a basketball player, and the people that weren't cool were in the choir. And so I was like, "I don't want to be in here." And she said, "We need more men in the choir. Sing a song for me." So I knew, you guys, if I sang this song, she'd leave me alone forever. And I sang Alvin and the Chipmunks' Christmas song. Does you know? Okay, so I was like, "Christmas, Christmas, town of me, town for toys and town for move at last, happy Christmas, happy fast, went upon that loop, move, I went a hula hoop. We can hardly stand the rain, 'cause Christmas don't be late. And Mrs. Hall looked at me and said, "That's not normal. You have a gift." I said, "No, I'm a basketball player." She said, "No, that voice, that's an impossible voice to do. Nobody can do that. How did you do that?" I said, "I don't know. I just naturally did it." She said, "Then you must be able to do other voices." And she was right. I could do Mickey and Donald and Goofy, voices from Disney that I had worked on my whole life, like Mickey Mouse. You know how he sounds.
Yeah.
"Oh, boy. Hi, everybody. Mickey Mouse here. All right. Where's Goofy? Oh, yeah. Where's Mickey? Hi, everybody. Where's Donald?" Mrs. Hall said, "That's incredible. You have a gift." And she helped put me on the path to where I am today, to being a speaker and entertainer, someone who teaches through comedy and music by sharing my voice and keeping the promise to share it, even if it's weird. You see, our weirdness is what makes us awesome. And Mrs. Hall was the first real mentor to say to me, "You have a gift. You need to share it." And she took me under her wing. She pulled me out of all the classes she thought I didn't need, like math, English, history, science. She put me in men's choir, mixed choir, started a quartet. I was in women's choirs, in every choir, just to see what my voice could do. And she became my teacher. So that right there is a story that I've shared for years. True story. It happened actually over many, many weeks of time, but I had to condense it so I could tell it in an entertaining way. And Mrs. Hall changed my life. So there's one of my stories.
Nice, amazing.
Is the final question?
Oh yeah. So so something else I wanted to ask. Have you ever considered like doing these like performances in a different scenario? So obviously you're going up in front of a big audience and like inspiring everyone to do the promise, but have you ever used your skills and like gifts in a different sense that wouldn't usually be used in well, your usual practices?
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I've found that it actually translates to many different opportunities and utilizations. So my main living is where I would go in front of a bunch of adults, leaders of big corporations, let's say, and I would teach them these things through this comedy and this music. And they're usually like, "What's happening?" Because they've never laughed at an event,
Yeah.
But I've also found that this is something that works really well in one-on-one coaching situations with youth and with even with very successful adults who might even be retired after having had a huge and great successful career making millions of dollars and trying to figure out what their next promise is going to be for themselves. I call it a promise legacy project. But for youth, especially when I've talked to them in small settings or even one-on-one, and we help them identify, clarify, and magnify their gifts, it transforms their life. And it's been a really neat thing to be able to see that, yeah, I can be in front of thousands of people on a stage and being like singing and everyone's laughing and we're having a good time. Or we can just talk one-on-one or one-on-three like today. And even in a podcast setting like this, it works. And people get it because they feel the passion of someone like myself saying, I know you have gifts, you have talents. And I like to say, you have talents I don't have, and I have talents you don't want.
Yeah. So for our very last question, it's known as the big question. Are you ready?
Yeah.
So if you were to give advice to the younger generations, what advice would you give them?
Nice. I would say find courage in your calling. And your calling needs to be discovered as soon as you possibly can find it. Once you discover your calling, that means the thing that you were made and meant to do. Once you find that out, you can't back away. Yeah. You need to be courageous enough to get in that river and float down. You see, there's lots of people in your life. Maybe it's a teacher, maybe it's a relative, maybe it's somebody that you even look up to. They perhaps started off understanding their calling, and so many people told them that they were no good at it, that they lost their courage and they went into a side stream instead of staying in the mainstream. And so I'd like you to take courage when you discover your calling, and don't let anything stop you from staying in that main river. And even though we've talked about mountains and the mountain peaks, and I love mountains because of all that they stand for, but this part is about the river. It's about flow. When you discover that which is your great promise to share with the world, don't let anything stop you. Let the momentum carry you. And don't let any naysayers tell you you're foolish or you're weird or you're no good, although they will yell those things at you. If you guys were to look up my YouTube channel, you get a kick out of how many negative comments there are. It's amazing to me. And yet, with every negative comment, that gives me more courage that I need to create more. And so I hope that message of taking courage within your calling makes sense, but that is the main message of the promise.
Also, just one more question before we end the podcast. So you said you spent your time making your book in the mountains, and you really like mountains and peaks. So do you have any like favorite activities, like any outdoor activities you like to do with your family or relatives of some sort, some friends up in the mountains?
Totally. Yeah, I love hiking. That's my favorite thing to do. And I have hit every single peak that I can see from my house. And I live in Salt Lake City, Utah, and there's a lot of mountain peaks all around me.
Yeah.
So that's my favorite thing to do is to hike. And I will go alone or with my brother, and we have a great time. And sometimes my kids will come. Last weekend, we actually went to a place called Goblin Valley, and then to another place called Canyonlands and Horseshoe Bend. And my sons and I have 3 boys and 1 girl. My daughter was on at prom, so she didn't come. It was her first prom. Oh my gosh. She's 16 and having a great time. But my sons, who are 15, 14, and 10, we went on a hike to the Great Gallery, which was all these ancient pictographs by the American Indians. It was so cool. And what happened is these Native Americans had painted these things thousands of years ago. And it was an 8-mile hike round trip in the hot, hot sun through the sand, the red rock, the white rock. It was beautiful. And I love more than anything to spend time with my family out in nature if ever we can. And that's one of the main reasons why we have the mountain peaks, is because it allows us, when we get to the top of a mountain, to see the world in a different way and to see ourselves in a different way. But as awesome as it is to get to the top, that's only halfway. We still have to come back down. And if we don't come back down safely, we have ruined the journey. And so coming back to the valley of home is what I call it. And I love returning to my home and to my family and keeping the promise that way. So thank you for all these great questions. You guys are so cool. I appreciate it. I hope we've covered some good things today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. So yeah, I think that's all we have for you today. Thanks so much for spending the time with us, and we hope you had a fantastic time.
You guys too. You're amazing. And have a great day and keep working on this stuff, okay? This and all those cool things.
All right.
Find your gifts, not mine. Mine are weird. Yours are awesome.
Well, thank you so much. That's all we have for you on Three Peaks podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time.